Hey, welcome back to Nick Vic Locks. Tonight is the next video in our How to Pick series where we'll be talking about T-pins. Now, what a T-pin is, it's a security driver that kind of looks like a T. It's easy to think about it as a half of a spool, just missing the top part or the bottom part. And you'll find them in two different orientations typically. You'll find them uh, like this with the skinny side down, or in a reverse T-pin configuration with the fat part on the bottom. And both have their own characteristics and behave differently within the lock. And sometimes you'll find them like this. This is a T-pin from a Sergeant Keso uh, dimple lock. Or as anybody that's ever tried to pick one of those calls them, they are a giant pain. But um, but this is the T-pin, and they're probably the rarest of security pins you're going to come across in a lock. It's not very common or often that you're going to find them, but figured it'd be good nonetheless to go over them and talk about how they behave and what they do. So in the two configurations where you find them in the reverse or in the standard, they're going to behave a little bit differently. So here in the standard configuration, depending on where it sits within the core in the Bible, if the skinny part is around the shear line, it's going to kind of act like a spool and give a false set with a lot of movement and play in the core. And then if it is not binding, or if it's there at the middle and you go to set it, you may not get audio feedback or any clicks from it. It's just going to go up because this part's so small compared to the chamber that it may not get an audible click or audio feedback, and you may not even feel anything when you go to push it up to set it. Whereas the reverse T-pin configuration, once you get the shear line between the Bible and the core to the fat part, it's going to behave just like any other pin. As you push it up, it's going to try to straighten itself out and behave more like a spool than anything else. But because it's the locks that I've picked so far, I've come across more reverse T-pins than I have standard T-pins, but it's going to vary, and they're going to be really rare for you to come across anyway. But we'll take a look at it in the rear cutaway so we can see how they look and talk about the feedback from them. Okay, so here we have the T-pin set up in the standard normal configuration. We can see with the skinny part, or what we call the waist on the spools, protruding down into the core of the lock, and that's where the pin is interacting with the shear line. We go to push this up. You can see that there's a lot of space and gap on either side of the T-pin, and what that's going to do is, one, allow us to have a false set. There. Just like you would with a spool, but also as we push it, you're less likely to get feedback from that pin to know when it's at the shear line, because pushing here versus once it gets up there, there's no real distance or no real change in resistance that you're going to feel. So we'll take a look at this as it's picked. Here we go. And you can see already massive false set from this T-pin. And I've raised it to shear line, but I have no click, no feeling of anything that it's set or not. Now, if we go to set the other pins we have in the lock, there we go. We have an even deeper false set now with that T-pin. And as we go to push it, it felt the same as it did before we set the first pin. We can see that slightly moving this back, we can drop the T-pin, and now that it's set and pushed up there, it's catching on the lip, but there was no audio feedback, no click, no change in resistance, but it would pass the jiggle test. Now let's take a look at it in the reverse T-pin configuration. Okay, now we've got it switched over into the reverse T-pin orientation. Now, most of the time when you have a reverse T-pin, the waist or thin part post is typically going to be inside of the spring, or it'll extend up into the spring and the spring will cover it. I had to make the T-pin for this lock because this is it's either an 1100 core or a 90A core. Can't remember. And they don't have T-pins for this, so I had to cut a spool to make it. So the waist part is a little thicker than normal. Now, in the reverse T-pin configuration, you can see it's going to catch more and give a little bit more feedback like a normal spool would, just because of that lip here on the bottom of it is going to catch and give us the feedback and give us an audible click when it is set. But because the waist is still at the shear line, it still allows us to have the false set and a lot of play and movement within the lock. Get that to focus a little bit better. Hi, Juno. I'll play with you in just a second. We'll push up here on it. And Juno, stop. And with the T-pin in the reverse position, you can get counter rotation from it. And you'll get a click when it is set. Okay, let me set this front pin, and then we'll there we go. There we go. And we'll bring the mic in close and we can listen for that click. And we did overset that. But bring that back down. So this is what they look like within the lock as you're picking it in both configurations. With the standard configuration, it can work as an overset trap because you're not going to have much feedback as the thin part raises up through the shear line. So If you were making a challenge lock, you could pair the standard T-pin with a serrated key pin to work as an overset trap for somebody. With this configuration, it's more or less going to behave like a normal pin, but if you were to widen out or counter mill the core, it'll make it easier for that to drop back down and to become unset as you're picking the lock. Alright, now that we have the side view lock, we can take a look at how each of the different pins or the T-pins are going to interact and play against you within the lock. I've alternated the placement of the pins here with a reverse T-pin, standard, reverse, standard, reverse, standard, just so we can see how they work with each other. This will go through, and one. When I raise it up, I can feel the bottom of the T-pin wanting to catch and give me resistance. If I ease off of my tension, we should be able to push that up into shear line. Or not. There we go. Now on pin 2, which is the reverse T-pin, I have no resistance or anything on that. Just feels like a loose unset pin. I go to 3. Oh, I'm sorry, that was our reverse. This is our standard. I have no resistance on that one. On 3, we have our reverse T-pin. I can feel it wanting to catch as the bottom comes up to the shear line. I'm going to push on that. We get that set. And having to ease off at the tension to set pin 3 caused pin 1 to drop back down. We can go back and set that again. And still nothing on 2. 3 feels good. 4, nothing. 5 is binding. There we go. And we did not drop pin 3, which is nice. Nothing on 6. So go back to 1. 1's binding. We just dropped everything. Right. And the thing to consider too with the orientation of the T-pins is how that is going to affect our binding order. So our reverse T-pins are binding before our regular T-pins. Well, now it doesn't feel like anything's binding. Nope. There we go. Now 5 should be binding, which it is. You want to be careful when you're doing your counter rotation to not drop the prior set T-pins. There we go. So now that we have all of our standard T-pins set, the only thing left are the reversed, or we have all of our reverse T-pins set. Now we need to set our standard T-pins. And 6 is set, could not feel or hear anything from it. Or nothing. I'm not getting any feedback on these pins as we're pushing on them. There we go. A deep false set now. We'll check on pin 2. It's binding. Set. No click, no change in resistance. We'll go to 4. 4. Did have a little bit of a click there. And now when we come back for 6, now the entire core has pressure on 6. That just popped up like a rocket, and we're open. Having a lock full of nothing but key pins is a pain, something you're never going to come across, and nor do I recommend pinning one up like that for yourself because they're terrible. But let's jump back out and take a look at some things in review and then go from there. So just to cover everything we've talked about so far, we have T-pins, the rarest of security pins that you're going to come across, typically found in one of two orientations, standard orientation or a reverse orientation, that both behave and act differently within the lock. The standard variation is going to give very little to no feedback as you pick it, and you may not know when it is set or above shear line, whereas the reverse orientation is more likely to drop when setting other pins or counter rotating the core, but will behave more like a spool within the lock as long as it's not one of the first ones set. With the standard orientation, it can delve into a overset trap that can be put into the lock when paired with serrated key pins to catch people that are putting too much pressure on it or not realizing there is a T-pin in the lock and forcing it above the shear line and getting the key pin stuck. Like I said, they're the least common of security pins you're going to come across, so may not be a necessity to learn how to deal with them, but it is something that you can have within the lock, so it's important to know what to feel for and how to deal with them. And the best way is to just think about it in one of two ways. Either it's going to be a spool, or we haven't covered it yet. It is in the future, but a barrel, sort of. Barrels are a little bit different, but kind of a similar idea here. We put them down here in this one. Let's flip this over. There we go. See, like a spool. And then a grossly exaggerated, not really the same thing, barrel. So similar, but still very different. There we go. But I thank you guys for watching the video. The next video, I think we're going to swerve over and talk about some dimples. I did put together a cutaway lock for dimples, or a dimple cutaway lock. So that'd be cool. But we'll be able to talk about that and the approach to picking dimple locks, which I think will be good and useful. Just an update on the giveaway. We have until the end of the month still. If you want to get in on that, all you have to do is post a video with the hashtag NickFit200, as well as tag me in it so it's easier for me to find it, telling me about the biggest waste of money on something you've spent for locksport. Whether it's a tool, piece of kit, a lock, training tool, whatever. If you think it was a waste of money and useless, make a video. Tell me about it. Or if you don't want to make a video, if that's not your thing, go back to my original announcement video for the giveaway and post a comment there telling me about the biggest waste of money you had for lock sport or lock picking. But I appreciate you guys watching the videos. If you have any feedback or anything, just leave a comment and let me know. Always open, always willing to improve. I've got some other videos in the works as well, or planned at least. We'll be talking about, like I said, dimples will probably be the next one. I plan on doing a video on my approach and thoughts on challenge locks as well as pen making. And I plan on covering barrel pens eventually. I have a script written together for it, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes. I also need to figure out a new cutaway lock if we're going to do barrels as well as gin drivers, so that I can have either serrated milling or counter milling in the core, to better showcase how those pins work and how to deal with them. So that'll be something I'll put together. If I can learn to actually zoom out here, pick a disc detainer lock, maybe we'll cover those at one point too. And then I've got several locks that I'm working on that I'll have videos for eventually once we get those open. But yeah, I appreciate you guys watching, and like, subscribe, share, comment. I don't know. You guys are people. Do what you want. And I'll see you next time.